decided to challenge myself to a week of dopamine detoxing.
You need to perform a dopamine detox.
Technically, I'm not supposed to consume anything that feels good for a week.
For one whole day, you will try to have as little fun as possible.
You're really doing nothing but wasting your time, making yourself miserable for no reason, and then psych people like myself get to look at you and think, what a silly, confused lad. To understand what dopamine detoxing really is, you first have to understand what neurons are. This is a neuron, the basic cells of the nervous system. You can think of your neurons as linked together, playing one long game of telephone. When a neuron is fired, it sends a signal to the next neuron, and that neuron sends a signal to the next neuron, and so forth. Neurons have two main properties, the first of which is called action potential. When a neuron receives a strong enough stimulus, it fires and goes through this whole process in which the voltage of the neuron goes up and then back down even lower than where it started, and then back to a resting state. If a stimulus isn't strong enough, then nothing happens. This all goes hand in hand with the second property, called all or nothing, meaning a neuron either fires or it doesn't, and once it does, it starts a chain of neurons being fired. And all of this can be thought of like flushing a toilet. If you push the handle hard enough, the toilet will flush, and if you don't push it hard enough, nothing happens. But once you push that handle, you can't stop what happens next. That water is going down, new water is coming in, until we eventually reach a resting state, which is exactly where we started. Neurons are made up of three main parts: the dendrites, the axon, and the terminal. The dendrites receive a signal from the previous neuron. This signal then travels through the axon, which is surrounded by a thin lipid layer called the myelin sheath, which both protects the neuron and helps the signals travel faster. You can think of the myelin sheath as the outer part of a cord, this little coating here that keeps all of the information that travels safe. Finally, the signal is sent to the next neuron in line through the terminal buttons. While neurons are sort of in a link, they don't actually touch each other. There's a really small space in between neurons called the synaptic gap. And in this small gap is where dopamine comes in. Neurotransmitters are chemical messages that are sent from one neuron to another through the synaptic gap. There's a bunch of neurotransmitters, but here's some of the more popular ones. Acetylcholine is associated with learning and memory. Serotonin, sometimes called the happy chemical, helps generally with mood and appetite. Norepinephrine is involved with focus and attention. And some of you may take melatonin at night to help you sleep, and yes, melatonin is a neurotransmitter, and believe it or not, it helps with your sleep-wake cycle. GABA, not that GABA. GABA is responsible for inhibiting or stopping neurotransmitter activity. So we can't experience a bunch of one neurotransmitter all the time. We can't be like happy or focused or tired all the time. Now you may have heard that you get dopamine when you get happy, but as we just talked about, that's serotonin. Dopamine is actually associated specifically with motivation and, more importantly, reward. When you go to the gym and lift that heavy weight, that's dopamine. When you take a test and you get a perfect score, that's dopamine. By seeing what your friends are up to on Instagram or Twitter or Threads, if people are still using that. Does anyone use that? I don't know. The point is, that's a small dopamine hit. Dopamine is about reinforcing behavior, not necessarily pleasure. And over time, your dendrites actually adapt to how much of a specific neurotransmitter they're receiving. This is why when you have Starbucks for the first time, you're feeling energized. But after a month or two of daily Starbucks, you might need twice as much caffeine to have the same effect. But this process of dendrites adapting to the neurotransmitters in your brain can take months to take place. But the reality is, dopamine has nothing to do with pleasure. It's about reward, it's about behavior reinforcement, and depriving yourself of anything fun for a day does absolutely nothing to reset your brain or really anything for your dopamine levels. Now, if you're truly addicted to something that's negatively affecting you, yeah, taking a break from it is probably a good idea, but addiction should be treated with evidence-based research, and dopamine detoxing doesn't have any scientific research to support it. However, dopamine plays a crucial role in your brain's reward system. Don't forget, there's other neurotransmitters that are just as important. Lastly, neurons have three main parts, and you'll want to remember that.